Shady letters in cheating wife's cedar box. I never meant to open the cedar box. It was my wife's. Has been since we moved into this house the summer of '85. She kept it on the top shelf of the closet, behind a stack of old quilts. I'd seen her lift it down a handful of times over the years, careful, almost reverent, like it held her mother's recipes or a bundle of baby clothes from when our girl was small. I never asked. In a long marriage, you learn there are drawers you don't open and stories you don't hurry. This morning, though, I was hunting for the spare cabin keys. We'd planned a weekend at the lake. Coffee on the porch, tackle on the rail, silence large enough to hear the geese before we saw them. I pulled the quilts down and there it was, the cedar box, smooth as a hymn, heavier than memory. When the lid lifted, the smell of old paper and lavender walked out like an old friend I didn't remember inviting. Inside, envelopes, 24 at least, tied with a frayed blue ribbon. I tell you this now because I wish someone had told me there are moments that bisect a life into before and after, and they don't always wear sirens. Sometimes they smell like cedar and lavender. The first letter began, "I dreamed about you again, L. Red dress, July heat, that stubborn curl near your left ear that never did what you told it. I woke up laughing and hating myself in equal measure. Is there a name for missing what was never meant to belong to you? T. It wasn't my handwriting. It wasn't my voice. And it wasn't addressed to me. There's a particular cold that doesn't announce itself with shivers. It stretches slow from the chest to the wrists, lingers at the base of the neck, takes your pulse and says, "Not yours today." If you've ever found something you would pay good money to unfind, you know this chill. And if you're listening right now, if some of this sounds like a door you once opened when you should have walked away, leave me a note. It helps to know we don't sit with these boxes alone. I read the second letter. You passed me in town and gave me that polite stranger's smile of yours. If I were a better man, I'd have been grateful for your mercy. I stared at the back of your coat until I couldn't see anything else. I remembered the warmth of your hand like it was still in mine. T. The paper shook, not from age. I set the letters out like evidence, some soft and yellowed from years of being touched, others crisp, the ink still stubbornly blue. Dates in the corner like mile markers. 1991, 1998, 2004, one from last fall. An initial signed at the bottom of each, T. Thomas Reed. My fishing buddy, 30 years. The man who taught our son how to tie a bowline. The man who hammered trim with me in the summer of '92 and fell off the ladder laughing. The man who stood next to me at our 40th anniversary and toasted to two stubborn people who never learned how to quit. I wanted to be wrong. The next letter was older, postmarked from a little town 2 counties over. Saw you at the Harvest Festival. You were wearing that blue sweater he likes. It's wicked, I know, but I imagined you wearing it for me, just once, just to see if the world would crack open and tell the truth. Tau. The world didn't crack open. Not then, but I did. When she came home with groceries, the box was open on the bed, the ribbon coiled like a vein. She set the bag down carefully, looked at the letters, then at me, like a nurse deciding where to place the needle. "Where'd you find it?" she asked, voice steady. "Top shelf," I said. "Behind the quilts." "You shouldn't have—" "Read them?" I finished, and the sound that came out of me was a laugh that had forgotten how to be gentle. "Is that the part that hurts?" She sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded like she was keeping them from flying apart. "They're from Thomas." I know. Gravel in my mouth. It was a very long time ago. Some of them are from last year. She closed her eyes, lids trembling. He never stopped writing. "And you?" I never wrote back a beat, but I kept them. There it was, the hook buried under the skin, the keeping. Hurt has many voices. Keeping is one of the loudest. Why? I asked. She looked me full in the face, and the woman in front of me was the girl I married, and the mother of my children, and the stranger who kept a man's letters in a cedar box. Because once, she said, they made me feel wanted in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. And when I didn't want him anymore, I still wanted to remember what it felt like to be seen. I wanted to rage. God knows I could have. Instead, something heavier sat down on my chest. A mourning not for her, not even for us, but for the man I'd been this morning, hunting keys, sure that the worst thing that could happen today was a missed coffee on the porch. We ate roast chicken that went cold while the crime drama laughed at itself on TV. At midnight, I went back to the box, as if more words might somehow change the shape of the ones I'd already read. You told me once that when you can't sleep, you listen to the clock to feel time holding you in place. Tonight I count between the ticks, hoping the space grows wide enough for the life we didn't choose. T. I pictured Thomas at his kitchen table. I pictured my wife in this very room, unfolding those pages, the quiet half-smile she wears when memory is kind. Something fragile I didn't know was still breakable broke. I drove to the lake at dawn, put my feet in the cold water and tried to measure 43 years with 10 toes. When did we stop going up there just because? When did the grandkids and the gutters and the good enough dinners become all the noise we had? Marriages don't collapse in a day. They fray one loose thread at a time until the whole thing sits there, unraveling politely, asking if anyone minds. That afternoon I asked, if he'd asked you to leave me back then, would you have? She moved the spoon in the pot, set it down like fragile china. For a minute, she said. I think I might have believed it was possible, and then I would have regretted it. Because it was never really about him. It was about remembering I existed. That landed where anger had been building a nest. I had been there, in the chair, in the house, at the table. Present but absent, the cruelest kind. We didn't talk about Thomas for a while. He died 2 years ago, heart taking itself back in the night. I carried a corner of his casket. After the service, I shook my wife's hand like we were acquaintances in a receiving line. We drove home. I mowed the lawn. A week later, I found the cedar box empty. Out back, the fire pit held an ash that smelled faintly of lavender. I thought I needed them, she said, but I don't. We started counseling because I didn't know how to hold something so big without dropping it on both of us. Dr. Morales had patient eyes and legal pads. She asked us to write truth letters to each other. Not romance. Inventory. I told my wife about the moment the lid lifted and my lungs forgot how. About the doc. About wanting to be the man she smiled about by herself for reasons that didn't include anyone else. I told her I had been proud of my reliability and blind to my absence, that I had kept lights on and ignored the rooms. She told me she had counted the spaces between my sentences, that she had learned to say, "It's fine," because it cost less. That the letters were a mirror she hated and kept staring into because hers was the only face she recognized there. Healing did not arrive like sunrise. It came like winter losing. A day above freezing, then a hard frost, then mud. We learned to touch in hallways again. Coffee appeared poured the way the other one takes it. Laughter visited like an old neighbor, unexpected, welcome, not inclined to stay too long. One afternoon, Dr. Morales asked a question that sat us both back. What was the most honest day of your marriage? Years lined up like bottles on a fence. Weddings, babies, deaths, promotions, lost dogs, bad knees. We picked a small day. 97. She had a cold. I made soup. The kids were at friends' houses. We fell asleep on the couch with a movie half-watched and woke to the VCR's blue screen humming its patient hum. We laughed at how ordinary it was. We loved how ordinary it was. Honesty, we decided, might look a lot like that. Boring and bright. I found out then that not all the letters had been to my wife's address. Some were kept because they never made it to the mailbox. The last bundle, recent, was postmarked to a P.O. box Thomas rented 2 towns over. Our mail carrier, an honest gossip blessed with a memory like a church ledger, mentioned it without meaning to. Funny thing, Mr. Carter. Before he passed, your friend used to swing by Tuesdays, pick up a stack, always whistling. I imagined him gathering words like wood, keeping the fire lit that way. I wanted to hate him. I mostly hated the way grief and desire sometimes use the same handwriting. In the middle of all this, our daughter Claire called to say she and her husband were separating. The air in the kitchen changed temperature. Love is like that. You can be furious with each other, and one phone call puts you back on the same side of the table. We drove to Claire's, held the baby while she cried. My wife sat on the floor with our grandson and built towers just so he could knock them down. On the way home, I said, "Do you think we taught them enough about staying?" She said, "Maybe we taught them about choosing." And I realized how those things can argue like siblings who still share a room. On our 44th anniversary, the kids threw us a backyard party, string lights, potato salad, the kind of off-key singing that counts as prayer. My wife wore a green scarf that made her eyes look like early spring. People clinked glasses and told the story of us in flattering fragments. Every marriage is 2 stories, I think. The one you live and the one folks tell at parties. We've got both. After the cake, our son Michael handed me a small box. Inside, a key on a leather fob. "The cabin," he said. "Thought you two might go up again." We did. The porch boards complained the way old bones do, but the view remembered us. We watched a heron keep his balance on one leg longer than I can stand on 2. We said very little, and what we said felt like pebbles in a pocket. Small, familiar, good to hold. She took my hand. "I loved you then," she said, "even when I couldn't feel it. I know that sounds wrong." "Doesn't sound wrong," I said. "Sounds like weather." Down by the dock, I found a sliver of red thread caught in a nail. For a full minute, my mind did what minds do, running from the present to the worst particular past. It was from an old porch cushion. I laughed at myself out loud, and somewhere the heron agreed. A week later, I drove to the cemetery. Thomas's stone is simple. Name, dates, a tiny engraved bass fish that makes me madder than it should. I stood there with my hands in my pockets and told the man beneath my feet that I'd carried his box for a while, but I was setting it down now. I told him we were trying. I told him rage is a kind of love with a switchblade in its boot, and I was done carrying it in my shoe. I told him I hoped he'd found quiet. If you've stayed with me this long, you probably didn't come for advice. You came because your own cedar box smells like lavender and regret. I can't tell you what to do with it. I can tell you what we did. We wrote more letters, the kind that don't fit inside envelopes. We put a bench by the kitchen window where morning finds us first. We keep a deck of cards on the table and play after dinner, and whoever loses has to tell a small truth. I learned she hates the word fine. She learned the clock in the den makes me feel watched. We rehung the wedding photo not because it proves anything, but because it reminds us we were brave at least once, and being brave is a muscle. Forgiveness didn't feel like a parade. It felt like walking into church after being away. The air knows you, the pews don't ask for explanations, the hymn remembers the shape of your mouth. It felt like looking at my wife across the garden and seeing the girl who laughed at my terrible jokes, and the woman who hid letters she should have burned, and the partner who shows up for soup and tower building and winter losing. It felt like loving a whole person on purpose. People come over and point at a photo on our mantle. It's from the anniversary party. She's wearing the green scarf. I look like a man who's learned how to say I'm listening without words. They say, "You two look happy." We are. Not because nothing bad ever grew in our garden, but because when the weeds came, we put our knees in the dirt side by side and pulled until our hands were stained green. Before you go, if any part of this sat down beside you, tell me what you'd have done with the letters. Burn them? Keep one? Mail them to the past with no return address? I'll be here, reading. It's easier to breathe when someone else's story is close enough to lean on. And if you're standing in a closet with a cedar box right now, thinking about keys and coffee on a porch that might never be the same, I want you to hear this from an old man who learned it late. There is a future that isn't acid. It will not look like the past you thought you had. It might look like a bench by a window, a hand that still knows your hand, and a silence big enough to hold two people who have decided to be brave again. Open the porch door. Let the air in. Sit. Begin again.